The light in the darkness. What is it about Jesus that captures human imagination so completely? 2 billion people. Imagine that number for a moment. 2 billion human beings alive today who believe that a man who lived 2,000 years ago in a small province of the Roman Empire was not just a teacher, not just a prophet, not just a wise man, but literally God in human form. This is unprecedented in human history. No other figure commands such devotion. Not Alexander the Great, who conquered the known world. Not Julius Caesar, whose name became synonymous with emperor. Not Socrates, whose philosophy shaped Western thought. Not Buddha, whose teachings guide millions toward enlightenment. Not Muhammad, whose message unified the Arab world. Jesus of Nazareth, a man who lived only about 30 years, who taught for perhaps 3 years, who was executed as a criminal by the Roman Empire. This man has become the most worshipped figure in human history. His name is invoked in prayers, whispered at bedsides, in hospital rooms where life hangs in balance, on battlefields where soldiers face death, in moments of desperation when people cry out for help, in moments of joy when they offer gratitude. And we might pause here and simply sit with this reality. 2 billion people, more than a quarter of humanity, organizing their entire understanding of the universe around this one figure. Why? What is it about Jesus that captures human imagination so completely, so persistently, across 2 millennia, across every continent, across cultures that have nothing else in common? That is the question we will explore. Slowly, carefully, circling around it from different angles, letting the mystery reveal itself gradually. To understand Jesus, we must first understand the world he was born into. And that world was the Roman Empire at its height. Picture the Mediterranean, that vast sea connecting 3 continents. And around its shores, from Spain to Syria, from Britain to Egypt, the Romans had established dominion, an empire unlike any the world had seen before. In the eastern Mediterranean, in a region the Romans called Judea, what we might call Palestine today, there was a small province, politically insignificant in the grand scheme of Roman power. But spiritually, this was ancient land. Land where Abraham had walked, where David had ruled, where Solomon had built his temple. The year was approximately 4 BCE, though, as we'll see, the calendar we use today was calculated centuries later and contains an error. So Jesus was actually born about 4 years before what we call year 1, which is one of history's small ironies. The province of Judea was under Roman occupation. And occupation is the right word. Not governance, not administration, but occupation. The Romans ruled through military force, through intimidation, through a system designed to extract wealth and maintain order. For the Jewish people living under this occupation, it was a time of tension, of waiting, of hope mixed with despair. They remembered their history, remembered when they had been free, when they had their own kings, when they answered to no foreign power. And they held on to prophecies, ancient words that promised a Messiah would come, an anointed one who would restore their kingdom. Into this world of occupation and hope, into this crossroads of civilizations where Jewish tradition met Roman power, where ancient prophecy collided with imperial reality, into this complicated, suffering, yearning world, a child was born. Let's establish something important here at the beginning, something that might surprise you. When we strip away legend, when we remove religious belief, when we look only at what historians and scholars can verify with reasonable confidence, We know surprisingly little about the historical Jesus, this man who would become the most famous person in human history, this figure around whom an entire civilization would organize itself. We can confirm only a handful of facts about him with scholarly certainty. The first fact: Jesus was born around 4 BCE in Galilee, specifically in a region in the northern part of the Roman province of Judea. Now, Galilee is important. This wasn't Jerusalem, wasn't the religious center, wasn't isolated. Galilee was by the coast. It was cosmopolitan, a crossroads where different cultures, different religions, different philosophies met and mingled. From childhood, Jesus would have been exposed to more than just Jewish tradition. There would have been Greek philosophy in the air, Zoroastrian ideas filtering in from Persia, Hindu concepts traveling along trade routes. This was a world in motion, ideas flowing like water across borders. And this exposure, this early immersion in diverse ways of thinking about the divine, about truth, about the nature of reality, this would shape the young Jesus in ways most Christians never consider. The second fact we can establish: Jesus' teacher was a man named John the Baptist. John was what scholars call an apocalyptic preacher, meaning he preached about the end times, about the apocalypse, about the day when God would return to earth in power and glory. Picture John, likely living in the wilderness by the Jordan River, calling out to people. His message urgent, pressing. The end is coming. God is returning. This is your chance to repent, to wash away your sins, to prepare yourself for judgment. And people came to him, hundreds, perhaps thousands, drawn by his certainty, his passion, his promise that the world as they knew it was about to transform. Jesus was among those who came, who listened, who was baptized by John in the river. But at some point, and we don't know exactly when or why, Jesus began to develop his own following, began to preach his own message, suggesting that what he learned from John, he transformed into something different, something uniquely his own. The third fact: the Romans crucified Jesus. This is crucial. This tells us something profound about how the Romans perceived him, because crucifixion was not a random punishment. It was reserved for specific categories of criminals. Let's understand what crucifixion meant, because the brutality of this execution method tells us something important about Roman power, about how empires maintain control. The Romans would take a person, stretch their arms along a horizontal beam, and drive iron nails through their wrists. Not their palms, as art often depicts, but their wrists, where the bones could support the body's weight. Then they would raise this beam and attach it to a vertical post already planted in the ground, and they would nail the person's feet to this post, sometimes individually, sometimes together, and then they would leave them there. You wouldn't die from blood loss. The nails were placed carefully to avoid major arteries. You would die from asphyxiation, from the inability to breathe. Because when you're hanging by your arms, your body weight pulls down on your chest. Your lungs can't expand properly. You can't draw a full breath. So to breathe, you would have to push yourself up on the nails in your feet, lifting your body weight just enough to expand your lungs to gasp air. And this would continue, hours passing, maybe days, pushing up to breathe, collapsing down when muscles failed over and over, until finally, exhausted, unable to push up anymore, you would suffocate slowly. It was designed to be agonizing, designed to be public, designed to be humiliating, designed to send a message to anyone watching. This is what happens when you challenge Rome. The Romans reserved this punishment for two categories of people: thieves and bandits, the lowest criminals and rebels, people who threatened Roman authority, who resisted the empire, who represented political danger. So when Jesus was crucified, when the Romans chose this specific method of execution, they were categorizing him. They were making a statement. They saw Jesus as a rebel, as a threat to their power. Whether he was actually organizing armed resistance or whether he was simply teaching ideas that undermined Roman authority. Either way, they perceived him as dangerous enough to deserve this particular death. This fact, this brutal historical fact, tells us something the church often tries to obscure. Jesus was not killed for being nice, not for teaching people to love each other. He was killed because the Roman Empire felt threatened by him. The fourth fact we can establish with certainty: Jesus had a brother named James, James the Just, as he came to be called. And after Jesus died, after the crucifixion, it was James who inherited the movement. James who became the leader of Jesus' followers. This group, these original followers of Jesus, were called the Ebionites, or sometimes simply the poor. And they practiced a version of Jesus' teachings that would seem very strange to most Christians today. They believed Jesus was a prophet, not God. They followed Jewish law. They emphasized doing good works, not just believing. They continued to live in Jerusalem, in the heart of Jewish society. James himself was respected by the Jewish community, protected even, which tells us something important. If Jesus' teachings had been such a threat to Jewish religious authority, if Jewish priests had wanted Jesus dead, then why would they protect his brother who was continuing to teach the same message? This doesn't add up, unless the story we've been told about who killed Jesus and why. Unless that story is not quite accurate. These are the four facts. Born around 4 BCE in Galilee, taught by John the Baptist, crucified by Romans, succeeded by his brother James. Everything else, virgin birth, miracles, walking on water, turning water into wine, resurrection, ascension to heaven, all of that comes from texts written decades later by people who never met Jesus. And this should give us pause, should make us wonder, what really happened? What did Jesus actually teach? And how did his message transform into the religion we know as Christianity? Let's turn now to what the Bible says about Jesus, because this is the story that shaped Western civilization, the narrative that 2 billion people believe today, according to the Gospels. And there are 4 main ones in the Bible: Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, each telling the story somewhat differently, emphasizing different aspects, sometimes contradicting each other. But together, they weave a narrative that has become foundational to Christian belief. The story begins with a problem. Humanity has disobeyed God. Remember the Garden of Eden, the tree of knowledge, the fruit that Adam and Eve ate when God told them not to? This was the original sin, the first act of human rebellion. And because of this sin, humanity has been separated from God, stained, corrupted, unable to restore the relationship on our own. No matter how good we try to be, no matter how many rules we follow, we cannot undo that original disobedience. So God devises a plan. He will send his Son to earth. His Son will become human, will live among us, will ultimately sacrifice himself, And this sacrifice will redeem humanity, will wash away the sin, will restore the broken relationship between God and His creation. This is the cosmic drama at the heart of Christianity. God sending His Son to die so that humans might be saved. And so Jesus is born, not in ordinary circumstances, but miraculously born to a virgin named Mary in the town of Bethlehem. This virgin birth establishing from the beginning that Jesus is not merely human, but divine. God's Son in a literal sense. Jesus grows up, and around age 30, He begins His ministry, His public teaching. And what does He do? According to the Gospels, Jesus travels throughout Galilee and Judea, performing miracles, healing the sick. If you touched Him, diseases would disappear, blindness cured, paralysis reversed, skin conditions healed. He cast out demons because the world, according to this understanding, was full of evil spirits that could possess people, that could cause madness and suffering. And Jesus had power over these demons, could command them to leave. He performed what we might call supernatural acts, walking on water, calming storms, feeding thousands with a few loaves of bread and some fish, demonstrations of power over nature itself. And He taught about the kingdom of heaven, about God's love, about forgiveness and faith. He told parables, stories with spiritual meanings. He gathered disciples, 12 men who followed Him closely, learning from Him. But according to the gospel narrative, Jesus' teaching brought Him into conflict with religious authorities, specifically the Jewish priests who governed day-to-day life in Judea under Roman occupation. These priests taught people to follow the law of Moses, the commandments, the regulations about what to eat, when to work, how to worship. They emphasize ritual, tradition, the proper way of doing things. But Jesus, according to the Gospels, Jesus challenged this emphasis on external observance. He said things like, "It's not what goes into your mouth that defiles you, but what comes out of it," meaning ritual cleanliness matters less than the condition of your heart. He healed people on the Sabbath, the day when work was forbidden, and when criticized for this, He said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, suggesting that human welfare was more important than strict rule following. He ate with tax collectors and sinners, people the religious establishment considered unclean, unworthy. And He said He came for the sick, not the healthy, for sinners, not the righteous. All of this, according to the gospel narrative, infuriated the Jewish priests. They saw Jesus as threatening their authority, undermining their teachings, leading people astray. And so, according to the story, these priests plotted against Jesus. They looked for ways to arrest Him, to silence Him permanently. The opportunity came during Passover, when Jerusalem was crowded with pilgrims. One of Jesus' own disciples, Judas Iscariot, agreed to betray Him, to identify Him to the authorities. Jesus was arrested, brought before the Jewish council, accused of blasphemy, of claiming to be the Son of God. And then, this is crucial to the traditional narrative. The Jewish priests brought Jesus to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. According to the Gospels, Pilate didn't particularly want to execute Jesus. He even offered to release Him as a Passover gesture. But a crowd, stirred up by the priests, demanded crucifixion. And so Pilate, washing his hands symbolically to show he considered himself innocent of Jesus' blood, ordered the crucifixion. Jesus died on the cross, was taken down, placed in a tomb. But 3 days later, the resurrection. Jesus came back to life, appeared to his disciples, gave them final instructions, and then ascended to heaven. And his instruction to his disciples was this: go into all the world, tell everyone the good news, that Jesus died for their sins, that salvation is available to all who believe in him, not just Jews, but everyone. This is the story, the narrative that became Christianity. But as we examine it more closely, questions begin to emerge. Let's think carefully about this narrative, because once we start asking questions, once we stop simply accepting the story on faith, problems appear. Gaps in logic, contradictions, elements that don't quite make sense. First question: how does God have a son? In Greek mythology, this made sense. The gods would come down and impregnate human women, producing demigods like Hercules, half god, half human. But that's not the Christian story. Mary remained a virgin. So how exactly did God produce a son? And if Jesus is the Son of God, but also God himself, if he's both the Father and the Son, what does that even mean? This is called the Trinity problem. God exists as three persons: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But these three are somehow also one God. And Christians have been debating this for 2,000 years without reaching a clear, logical explanation. Second question: why does Jesus need to sacrifice himself? We sinned by disobeying God, and now Jesus redeems us by dying. But what's the mechanism? How does his death wash away our sin? If someone wrongs me and then a third party punishes themselves for it, does that somehow make me forgive the original offender? The logic doesn't quite connect. Third question, and this one is deeply problematic. Why does the Bible blame the Jewish priests for Jesus' death? Because this blame, this narrative that the Jews killed Jesus, has been used for 2,000 years to justify persecution, pogroms, violence against Jewish people. Christ killers, they were called. Blamed for deicide, for killing God. But when we look at Jewish history, when we understand how Jewish communities actually functioned, this story becomes very hard to believe. Within Jewish tradition, debate is encouraged. Disagreement is normal. There were multiple Jewish sects at this time: Sadducees, Pharisees, Essenes, and they argued constantly with each other about interpretation, about practice, about authority. Just because someone disagrees with religious authorities doesn't mean they get executed. Disagreement was part of the tradition. More importantly, there was an unwritten law that was universally respected among Jews. You do not betray fellow Jews to foreign authorities. You might argue among yourselves, but you don't hand each other over to Romans or Greeks or any other occupying power. The Jewish people saw themselves as separate, distinct, God's chosen people. Betraying one of their own to Romans would have been unthinkable. And remember James. Jesus' brother, after Jesus died, James stayed in Jerusalem, continued teaching, and was protected by Jewish authorities. If Jesus' message was so threatening to Jewish priests that they had him killed, why would they protect his brother who was teaching the same things? It doesn't add up. The more likely explanation, the one that fits the historical evidence, is that the Romans killed Jesus for their own reasons, political reasons, not religious ones. The Romans were brutal occupiers. They didn't need much justification to execute someone they perceived as a threat. And Jesus was teaching things that undermined Roman power, not necessarily organizing armed rebellion, though some scholars think he might have been involved in resistance movements, but certainly teaching ideas that made Roman authority seem meaningless, temporary, ultimately powerless. And for Rome, that was threatening enough. So the Romans crucified him, reserved their most brutal execution method for someone they categorized as a rebel, as a threat to the empire. But then why does the Bible blame the Jews instead of the Romans? This is one of the key questions one will return to, because the answer reveals how Christianity was transformed from Jesus' original teachings into something quite different, something that served the empire rather than challenging it. But let's continue examining the problems with the traditional Christian narrative. Fourth question: if Jesus is the Son of God, if he's divine, then how can he die? And more importantly, if he knows he's going to be resurrected in 3 days, if he knows death is temporary for him, then where's the sacrifice? For the sacrifice to be meaningful, Jesus would have to genuinely suffer, genuinely risk permanent loss. But if he's God, if he knows he's coming back, then his death is more like a temporary inconvenience than a genuine sacrifice. Fifth question: why the resurrection? Jesus died to redeem humanity. So once he's dead, the redemption is complete, right? The sacrifice has been made. So why come back? What purpose does the resurrection serve? Sixth question: why does there need to be a second coming? According to Christian theology, Jesus will return to earth one day, the second coming, when he will judge the living and the dead, will establish God's kingdom permanently. But if he already accomplished his mission, if salvation is already available to everyone who believes in him, then what's left to do? Why come back? And perhaps the most troubling question of all: why do people have to worship Jesus? If his mission was to redeem humanity, to restore our relationship with God, then why do we need to believe in him specifically? Why isn't it enough to just be good people? Why does God care whether we acknowledge Jesus or not? Let's think about how Christianity differs from almost every other religious tradition, because this difference is striking and troubling in its implications. Buddhism says, follow the Eightfold Path, reduce suffering, achieve enlightenment, and you will escape the cycle of rebirth. Hinduism says, fulfill your dharma, live righteously, and you will progress through the cycle of reincarnation toward eventual liberation. Islam says, submit to God, follow the 5 pillars, and you will enter paradise. Judaism says, follow the Torah, keep the covenant, and you will be among God's chosen people. Every major religious tradition essentially says, be good, follow these principles, live righteously, and you will be rewarded. But Christianity says something radically different. It doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how much you help people. It doesn't matter if you're the most ethical person on earth. If you don't believe in Jesus, if you don't accept him as your savior, you will burn in hell forever. Think about that for a moment. A good person, someone who has lived with kindness and compassion, who has helped others, who has caused no harm. If that person was born in India and practiced Hinduism, or was born in China and followed Buddhist teachings, or was born in ancient Greece before Christianity existed, according to Christian doctrine, that person goes to hell. Not because they did anything wrong, but simply because they didn't believe in Jesus. This makes Christianity a missionary religion. Because if you're a Christian and you truly believe this, then you have a moral obligation to convert other people, to save them from eternal damnation. And this is why Christianity has been one of the most aggressive religions in history, spreading through conquest, through colonization, through forced conversion. Believers genuinely thinking they were saving souls, even as they destroyed cultures. But we should ask, does this make sense? Would a loving God condemn good people to eternal suffering just because they were born in the wrong place, heard the wrong stories, believed the wrong things? The standard Christian answer is, don't question it. Its mystery, miracle, magic, faith is more important than reason. Just believe. But that answer should make us suspicious. Because when someone tells you, don't ask questions, just obey, that's usually a sign that something doesn't add up, that you're being manipulated rather than enlightened. So let's step back from the biblical narrative for a moment. Step back from what the church teaches and ask the fundamental questions. What did Jesus actually believe? What did he actually teach? Because we can be fairly certain he didn't walk around saying, I am God, worship me, and you'll be saved. That doesn't sound like a Jewish teacher in first century Galilee. That sounds like theology developed later by people with their own agendas. To understand what Jesus actually taught, we need to look at the pattern, the consistent message that runs through every great prophet and poet and philosopher we've encountered throughout human history. Homer in the Iliad, the Hebrew prophets, Zoroaster in Persia, Plato in Athens, Buddha in India. They all taught variations of the same fundamental truth. There is a source, the divine, God, the universe, the ultimate reality, whatever name we give it. And from this source, everything emanates. The entire cosmos flows from this single origin. Our bodies are material, formed through natural processes, through evolution, through the physical laws that govern matter. But our consciousness, our awareness, what we might call our soul or spirit, this is a divine spark, a piece of the source itself. And after we die, this spark returns to the source, and the cycle continues. Life, death, rebirth. Until eventually, we merge fully with the divine, until we remember completely what we always were. This is what Buddhism teaches when it speaks of enlightenment and the cycle of samsara. This is what Hinduism describes in the concept of Atman and Brahman. This is what Zoroastrianism meant by Asha and the ultimate triumph of good. This is what Plato pointed to with his realm of forms and the soul's journey. And Jesus was teaching this same eternal wisdom, but translated for his time, his place, his audience, put into language and metaphors that first century Jews and Romans could understand. But if this is what every prophet teaches, if this is the universal message, then why is Jesus special? Why did his particular expression of this truth have such profound impact? And the answer, the key to understanding Jesus, is that the Roman Empire was particularly evil. Let's think about what had changed in human civilization by the time of Jesus. In the time of Homer, in the age of heroes like Achilles, people understood that everyone does both good and evil, that human nature contains both capacities. Achilles does great heroic deeds, but he also acts from pride and rage, betrays his friend Patroclus, desecrates Hector's body in fury. He's complicated, flawed, fully human, and the lesson of the Iliad is about forgiveness. Remember when King Priam comes to Achilles, kisses his hand, begs for Hector's body back. That act of humility, that willingness to forgive, breaks through Achilles' rage and reminds him of his own humanity. There's an acknowledgement that we all struggle with good and evil within ourselves, and that forgiveness, both of ourselves and others, is how we remain human. But by the time of the Roman Empire, something had changed. The Romans weren't conflicted warriors struggling with right and wrong. They were systematic in their brutality. They had industrialized violence, turned conquest and exploitation into a well-oiled machine. They conquered on a massive scale, enslaved entire populations, extracted wealth through organized systems of taxation and tribute, killed efficiently and without remorse. And they justified all of it as bringing civilization to barbaric peoples, as establishing peace and order. Pax Romana, they called it, Roman peace. Though it was the peace of the graveyard, the peace of total submission. The Romans had completely dehumanized the people they ruled over, saw them not as fellow humans with their own dignity and worth, but as resources to be exploited, obstacles to be removed, barbarians to be civilized. And this created a profound spiritual crisis for the people living under Roman rule. How do you explain the fact that the Romans, who are brutal and evil, who crush all opposition, who show no mercy, how do you explain that they rule the world? How do you find comfort when you're a good person, trying to live righteously, trying to follow God's law, but you're a slave, you're oppressed, you have no freedom? How do you maintain hope when evil seems to triumph so completely, so systematically, so overwhelmingly? This was the spiritual problem that Jesus came to address. This was the question his teaching attempted to answer. And his answer was radical, revolutionary, dangerous to the empire. Jesus said, and we need to understand this clearly, because it's the heart of his teaching. Jesus said that the world we live in, this material world where Romans seem to triumph, where the rich and powerful dominate, where violence and exploitation appear to succeed, this world is false. It's a corpse, dead, not the true reality. Those who most embrace death and evil and hatred win in this false world. That's how it works here. But they've lost what really matters. What matters is the divine realm, the kingdom of heaven, the world of the spirit. And in that realm, the Romans have already lost. They've destroyed their own souls. They're spiritually dead even while they appear powerful. Think about Achilles again. How did Achilles get what he wanted? By sacrificing his friend Patroclus to his own pride, by choosing glory over loyalty, rage over love. And what was the result? He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't rest. All he could do was mutilate Hector's body in futile rage, tormented by demons of his own making. That's the Roman way. That's what happens when you build your life on conquest and exploitation. You might have external power, but internally you're tormented, haunted, unable to find peace. And Jesus was telling people, I know the world is evil. I know that the rich and powerful oppress you, and you hate them. That's natural. That's human. But use your imagination. Use your empathy. Look into their minds and see how tormented they are. See how they live every day with demons that haunt them. How they can't truly rest. How they hate themselves and the world around them. And when you see this, when you truly understand their spiritual poverty, you'll realize they're more pitiful than you are. You may be poor, you may be a slave, you may have no political power, but at least you're not haunted by demons. At least your soul is still alive. At least you still have the capacity for love and joy and connection. So if you really want to do good in the world, if you want to bring light into darkness, you have to forgive your enemy. You have to love your enemy. Because only by loving your enemy can you release your enemy from their demons. And that's what will actually save the world. Not through revolution, not through violence, not through overthrowing the oppressor, but through forgiveness, through love, through maintaining your own spiritual purity, even in the face of evil. Now think about how radical this message was, how dangerous it was to the Roman Empire. Jesus was telling slaves and poor people and oppressed populations, don't seek vengeance. Don't hate your oppressors. Instead, forgive them, love them, see their suffering. From a revolutionary perspective, This might seem like teaching people to accept their oppression, to be passive in the face of injustice. But from the Roman perspective, this was incredibly dangerous. Why? Because Roman power was based on fear and material incentive. They controlled people by threatening violence and offering rewards to obey, and you might prosper. Disobey, and we'll crush you. But Jesus was saying none of that matters. The Romans can kill your body, but they can't touch your soul. They can take away your freedom, but they can't take away your inner light. They can dominate this false, temporary, material world. But in the true reality, in the spiritual realm, they're already defeated. If slaves start to see themselves as spiritually superior to their masters, if they stop fearing death, if they stop caring about material wealth and power, then the entire system of control falls apart. Because what power does Rome have if people don't fear death? What leverage do they have if people don't want the things Rome can offer? This is why the Romans killed Jesus, not because he was organizing a military rebellion, though they may have feared that too, but because he was teaching people that Roman power was fundamentally meaningless. He was teaching people to opt out of the entire system of domination by recognizing that this material world is false and temporary, that what looks like power is actually spiritual death, that the last shall be first and the first shall be last. That's subversive. That's threatening. Because if enough people believe it, if enough people stop caring about Roman rewards and punishments, then Rome has no power over them. The empire can kill your body, but it can't make you obey in your heart. It can't force you to value what it wants you to value. It can't prevent you from finding meaning and purpose and joy in ways that have nothing to do with its system of control. This is what the Romans couldn't tolerate. A teacher who was showing people that the emperor has no clothes, that Roman power is ultimately powerless against the human spirit. Now, you might be thinking, this is all speculation. How do we know Jesus actually taught these things? Where's the evidence? And this is where our story takes a fascinating turn. Because there is evidence. There are texts that were hidden for centuries. Texts that show us what Jesus really taught before his message was co-opted and transformed. In 1945, in a place called Nag Hammadi in Egypt, a remarkable discovery was made. A collection of ancient texts buried sometime around the 4th century, probably to hide them from the Roman Catholic Church, which was systematically destroying any writings that contradicted its official doctrine. Among these texts was something called the Gospel of Thomas. Not a narrative like the Gospels in the Bible, not a story of Jesus' life and death and resurrection, but a collection of sayings, teachings attributed to Jesus, 114 sayings to be precise. And when scholars examined this text, when they compared it to other early Christian writings, many concluded that the Gospel of Thomas might actually preserve Jesus' original teachings more authentically than the canonical Gospels. Why would they think this? First, because the Gospel of Thomas has a unique voice, a poetic quality, a spiritual depth that feels original, authentic, inspired, the kind of thing that can't be easily faked or replicated. Poetry comes from divine inspiration. It has a signature or resonance. And the Gospel of Thomas has this quality. Second, what Jesus teaches in the Gospel of Thomas aligns perfectly with what every other prophet and poet throughout history has taught. It's consistent with Plato, with Homer, with Zoroaster, with Buddha. That consistency across independent sources suggests we're seeing authentic wisdom, not manufactured doctrine. Third, when great thinkers throughout history have tried to understand what Jesus really meant, when they've gone back to the sources and thought deeply about his message, they arrive at conclusions remarkably similar to what we find in the Gospel of Thomas. Dante did this, Dostoevsky did this, many others, and they all converged on similar insights that Jesus was teaching about inner transformation, about the divine spark within each person, about love and forgiveness as the keys to spiritual freedom. So let's look at what the Gospel of Thomas actually says. Let's hear these teachings and see how they illuminate everything we've been discussing. The Gospel of Thomas begins with these words: "Whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not experience death." Think about what this means. Sit with it for a moment. In the universe, death doesn't really exist, because when your body dies, your soul, your consciousness, your divine spark, it doesn't die. It returns to the source, to the astral plane, to the divine realm. Your soul can never truly die. It's eternal, indestructible, a piece of the source itself. But you have to recognize this. You have to know that you are more than your body, more than your temporary material form. You have to recognize that you are a divine spark. Once you recognize this, once you truly understand it, not just intellectually, but experientially, then you become immortal in a meaningful sense. Because you no longer fear death, you no longer identify solely with your temporary physical existence. Once you recognize this, once you truly understand it, not just intellectually, but experientially, then you become immortal in a meaningful sense. Because you no longer fear death. You no longer identify solely with your temporary physical existence. But if you don't recognize it, if you remain trapped in the illusion that you are only your body, only this material form, then you fear death, and that fear keeps you imprisoned, keeps you controllable, keeps you from accessing your true nature. The next saying in the Gospel of Thomas: "Let him who seeks continue seeking until he finds. When he finds, he will become troubled." When he becomes troubled, he will be astonished, and he will rule over all. This is Plato's allegory of the cave. The same pattern, the same journey. Remember the prisoner who escapes the cave and sees the real world with sunlight? At first, it's painful, or confusing. The light blinds him. His eyes hurt. He can barely see. He's troubled, disoriented. Everything he thought he knew is revealed as shadow and illusion. But if he persists, if he doesn't run back to the comfortable darkness of the cave, eventually he adjusts. He sees clearly. He understands reality as it truly is. And then he's astonished, amazed by the beauty and truth and vastness of what he now perceives. And this knowledge, this vision, gives him power. Not power over others in the worldly sense, but power over himself. Freedom from illusion, from fear, from the chains that bound him. The spiritual path is painful. It involves confusion and struggle. It means giving up comfortable beliefs, facing uncomfortable truths. But if you persist, you will see reality as it truly is. And that vision transforms everything. Another saying from the Gospel of Thomas, and this one is crucial. Perhaps the most important teaching in the entire text. If those who lead you say to you, "See, the kingdom is in the sky," then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, "It is in the sea," then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside of you and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known and you will realize that it is you who are the sons of the living Father. But if you will not know yourselves, you dwell in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty. Let's unpack this slowly. because this teaching undermines almost everything traditional Christianity says. Jesus is saying, don't believe what religious authorities tell you. Don't believe priests who claim to know where God is, where heaven is, how to reach it. The kingdom of heaven is not some physical location you go to after you die. Not in the sky, not anywhere external to yourself. The kingdom is inside of you. It's your consciousness, your awareness, your divine spark. And when you recognize this spark, when you know yourself truly and deeply, then you realize you are a child of God. Not in some distant metaphorical sense, but literally. You are made of the same divine substance as Jesus, as the source itself. Notice what Jesus doesn't say here. He doesn't say, I'm the Son of God and you're not. He doesn't say, worship me and you'll be saved. He says, we're all sons and daughters of the living Father. We all have the same divine nature, the same potential. And notice, he doesn't reference the Bible, doesn't talk about Adam and Eve or Moses or David, doesn't appeal to scripture or tradition or religious authority. Because for Jesus, all that is secondary. What's true, what's ultimate, is the divine spark in you. Everything else is just stories and rules created by humans. And if you don't know yourself, if you don't recognize your divine nature, then you dwell in poverty. Not material poverty necessarily, but spiritual poverty. You are that poverty. You live in lack, in fear, in separation, in illusion. This is revolutionary teaching. It places spiritual authority not in institutions or priests or scriptures, but in individual consciousness, in direct experiential knowledge of your own divine nature. Another saying, Jesus saw infants being suckled, and he said to his disciples, these infants being suckled are like those who entered the kingdom. They said to him, shall we then, as children, enter the kingdom? Jesus said to them, when you make the two one, and when you make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below, and when you make the male and the female one and the same, so that the male not be male, nor the female female, and when you fashion eyes in the place of an eye, and a hand in the place of a hand, and a foot in the place of a foot, and a likeness in the place of a likeness, then you will enter the kingdom. What is Jesus saying here? Let's explore this slowly. We are born into this world, and as infants, we don't see the divisions that society imposes. We don't distinguish between male and female, rich and poor, Jew and Gentile, Roman and slave. We just perceive reality directly, without all the conceptual overlays, without all the judgments and categories and separations. But as we grow, we learn these divisions. We're taught to see the world through the lens of difference, of separation, of hierarchy, and these divisions become real to us. We forget that they're constructs, that they're not ultimate reality. Jesus is saying, to enter the kingdom, you need to unlearn these false divisions. You need to make the two one, to see past the illusion of separation, male and female. These are biological categories, but they're not your essence. Your divine spark has no gender. It's neither male nor female, or perhaps both, or perhaps something beyond these categories entirely. Inside and outside. You learn to distinguish between your inner mental world and the external physical world. But in truth, these are connected, interpenetrating. Your consciousness creates your experience of reality. Above and below. You learn hierarchy, superiority, and inferiority, better and worse. But in divine reality, everything is interconnected. Everything is part of the same source. When you see past all these false divisions, When you recognize that they're conceptual overlays on a fundamentally unified reality, then you access the kingdom. And when you fashion eyes in place of an eye, when you develop your imagination, your creative vision, when you can see possibilities beyond what physically exists, when you can see the divine in the ordinary, the eternal in the temporary, the sacred in the mundane, then you truly see. Then you're able to be your true self. Not the role society has assigned you, not the identity you've been taught to assume, but your authentic divine nature. And what you'll understand is that we're all connected by the divine source. The separation is illusion. We're all one. The disciples said to Jesus, "Show us the place where you are, since it is necessary for us to seek it." And he said to them, "Whoever has ears, let him hear. And there is light within a man of light, and he lights up the whole world. If he does not shine, he is darkness." This exchange is beautiful and tells us so much about what Jesus was really teaching. The disciples are asking him, "Tell us how to be like you. Show us where you are. Show us the path to follow." It's the natural question. The question students always ask teachers. Where do I go? What do I do? How do I reach what you've reached? And Jesus' response is, be yourself. There's a light inside of you, not inside me, that you need to access by following me, but inside you, your own unique divine spark. Look for that light, find it, and shine it into the world. Jesus is not saying, follow me. He's not saying, worship me. He's not saying, I'm special and you're not. He's saying each person has their own divine spark. Each person has their own light. And each person has to find it themselves. No one can do it for you. Not Jesus, not any teacher, not any religious authority. You have to look within. Have to discover your own light. Have to learn to let it shine. This is profoundly different from what Christianity later became, from religions that say, follow this path, obey these rules, believe this doctrine. Jesus is teaching radical, individual, spiritual autonomy. Find your own light, trust your own divine spark, be yourself fully and authentically. And when you do, when you find that light and let it shine, you light up the whole world around you. But if you don't, if you never find your light, if you never let it shine, then you are darkness. Not because you're evil or bad, but because you're living in spiritual poverty in ignorance of your own divine nature. Jesus said, I took my place in the midst of the world, and I appeared to them in flesh. I found all of them intoxicated. I found none of them thirsty. And my soul became afflicted for the sons of men, because they are blind in their hearts and do not have sight. For empty they came into the world, and empty too they seek to leave the world. But for the moment they are intoxicated. When they shake off their wine, then they will repent. What a profound image. People are drunk, intoxicated by the material world, by wealth, by power, by status, by pleasure. They came into this world with nothing. Naked, helpless infants. And when they die, they will leave with nothing. Unable to take their possessions, their achievements, their worldly success. But right now, in the middle, they're chasing all this stuff frantically. This money, this status, this power that they can't keep, that means nothing in the ultimate sense. It's as if they're drunk, as if they've lost their minds, pursuing illusions while ignoring what's real. And Jesus says, he found none of them thirsty, meaning they're not seeking truth, not hungry for the divine, not looking for what would actually satisfy them. They're so busy being drunk on material pursuits that they don't even realize they're spiritually dehydrated, starving for real meaning. And Jesus' soul became afflicted. He felt sorrow, compassion, grief for humanity caught in this trap. Because they're blind in their hearts, they can't see what's real. They've lost the ability to perceive the divine, to recognize their own spiritual nature. But eventually, and this is the hope, they will shake off their wine. They'll sober up. Maybe not in this lifetime, maybe not for many lifetimes, but eventually. Eventually they'll realize that chasing worldly success is empty, that accumulating possessions doesn't bring fulfillment, that power and status don't satisfy the soul. And then they'll repent. Not in the sense of feeling guilty for sins, but in the original meaning of the word metanoia. A change of mind, a transformation of consciousness, a turning around to face a new direction. Jesus said, if the flesh came into being because of spirit, it is a wonder. But if spirit came into being because of the body, it is a wonder of wonders. Indeed, I am amazed at how this great wealth has made its home in this poverty. This saying addresses one of the fundamental questions of human existence. What is the relationship between consciousness and matter, between spirit and flesh? Jesus is saying, if spirit creates flesh, if consciousness gives rise to material form, that makes sense, that's wonderful, but understandable. The greater producing the lesser, the eternal giving rise to the temporary. But if you think it works the other way, if you think the body creates consciousness, if you think this limited material form gives rise to vast, infinite spirit, that would be impossible, incomprehensible, a wonder of wonders in the sense of being absurd. How could something so small and limited create something so vast and abundant? And then the beautiful line, I am amazed at how this great wealth has made its home in this poverty. The great wealth is spirit, consciousness, the divine spark, infinite, eternal, unlimited. The poverty is the body, material form, this temporary physical existence, limited, mortal, constrained. And Jesus marvels at how something so rich inhabits something so poor, how the infinite dwells in the finite, how the eternal expresses itself through the temporary. This connects to a beautiful insight from Rumi, the Persian poet who lived centuries later. Rumi also said, this world is a prison for drunks. The same metaphor, the same understanding, and Rumi certainly never read the Gospel of Thomas. It was buried, hidden, unknown for over 1,000 years. But they're thinking the same thoughts, expressing the same truths, because they're both accessing the same divine source, both receiving inspiration from the same eternal wisdom. That's how you know this is real wisdom. When people separated by centuries and cultures who couldn't possibly have influenced each other arrive at the same insights independently. Jesus said, the Pharisees and the scribes have taken the keys of knowledge and hidden them. They themselves have not entered, nor have they allowed to enter those who wish to. You, however, be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. Now, this is a direct attack on organized religion, on religious hierarchies that claim to mediate between people and the divine. The Pharisees were Jewish religious leaders, priests who created a system where they positioned themselves as necessary intermediaries. Only we know the truth. Only we have access to God, so you must listen to us and obey us. And Jesus is saying they've taken the keys of knowledge, they've hidden the path to divine understanding. Not given it away freely, but hoarded it, used it to maintain their power and authority. And The tragic irony is, they themselves haven't entered. They themselves don't have genuine spiritual understanding. They have rituals and rules and doctrines, but not the living experience of the divine. And they won't let others enter either. Because if people discovered they could access the divine directly without priestly mediation, then the priests would lose their power, their special status, their control. So Jesus tells his followers, be as wise as serpents. Remember the serpent in the Garden of Eden? The serpent who told Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge? Jesus is saying that was good. That was wisdom. It's natural and right to seek knowledge, even if it means disobeying false authorities, even if it means questioning what you've been told, because the true God, the real divine source, is pure love, pure compassion, pure forgiveness. God wants you to grow, to learn, to explore, to discover, wants you to use your freedom, your curiosity, your creativity. Only false gods, only human authorities pretending to speak for God want you to remain ignorant and obedient. If priests tell you not to seek knowledge, if they tell you just to believe and obey, that tells you they're false authorities serving false gods. The real God gave you a mind, gave you curiosity, gave you the capacity to question and explore. Obviously, God wants you to use these gifts. And be innocent as doves, meaning maintain purity of heart, sincerity of intention, genuine love and compassion. Don't become cynical or manipulative or power hungry like the false religious authorities. Seek truth wisely and persistently, but maintain your spiritual innocence, your openness, your capacity for wonder and love. Jesus said, "Whoever has come to understand the world has found only a corpse, and whoever has found a corpse is superior to the world." This is perhaps the most radical, most dangerous thing Jesus taught, and it's what got him killed. He's saying, the world we live in, the material world, the world of Roman power and wealth and status, it's a corpse. It's dead. It's spiritually empty, meaningless, nothing. Think about what this means in the context of the Roman Empire. Rome stretches across the known world. Its legions are invincible. Its roads and aqueducts demonstrate engineering mastery. Its laws govern millions. It sees itself as the height of civilization. And Jesus is saying it's a corpse. It's nothing. It's already dead, even though it appears powerful. Once you recognize this, once you refuse to be impressed by Roman power, once you stop valuing what Rome values, once you see through the illusion, then you're superior to the world. Not in the sense of being better than other people, but in the sense of being free from the world's control. Rome can't touch you anymore because you no longer care about what Rome can offer or threaten. You're free, spiritually free. And that's a threat to the empire that must be eliminated. Because if this understanding spreads, if people stop valuing Roman wealth and power, if they opt out of the entire system, then Rome loses its ability to control them. This is why Jesus was crucified. Not for being nice, not for teaching love, but for teaching people that the empire is a corpse, that Roman power is ultimately powerless against the human spirit. Jesus told a parable, a story about a man who prepared a great dinner and sent his servant to invite guests. The servant went to the first person, "My master invites you." And that person said, "I have business with merchants. I must go give them my orders. I can't come." The servant went to the second person, "My master invites you." And that person said, "I just bought a house. I'm busy all day. I have no spare time." The servant went to the third person, "My master invites you." And that person said, "My friend is getting married. I'm preparing the banquet. I can't come." The servant went to the fourth person. "My master invites you." And that person said, "I just bought a farm. I'm going to collect rent. I can't come." The servant returned to his master and reported, "Those you invited have asked to be excused." And the master said, "Go outside to the streets. Bring back whoever you happen to meet so they may dine. Businessmen and merchants will not enter the places of my Father." This parable is revolutionary. It inverts all of society's values. Today, we're taught to worship billionaires, to admire successful business people, to value wealth accumulation as the highest achievement. But Jesus is saying, no, these are actually the worst people. Why? Because the divine has prepared a great feast for us. When we die, when we return to the source, we will experience the greatest happiness, the most profound joy, the deepest peace. The divine is inviting us to this feast, but the business people, the wealthy, the successful, by worldly standards, they're saying, "I'm too busy making money. I'm too busy managing my properties. I don't have time for your feast." They're so caught up in accumulating dead things, in pursuing empty success, in doing what Jesus calls evil in this world, that they refuse the invitation to genuine joy. So they will lose out, not as punishment, but as natural consequence. They chose money over spirit, chose the temporary over the eternal, chose poverty over wealth, in the only sense that truly matters. And the people society considers worthless, the poor, the unemployed, the ones with no status or success, they're the ones who will feast with the divine, not because poverty is virtuous in itself, but because they're not so intoxicated by worldly success that they've forgotten what really matters. At this point in our exploration, we might pause and ask a practical question. If God wants us to be creative, to seek our divine spark, to find our own path, how do we actually do that? Don't we need socialization, education, guidance from others? But if we're socialized, won't we be brainwashed to seek materialism, to chase worldly success, to value what society says we should value? This is the dilemma, the paradox. And Jesus knew it, acknowledged it, offered no easy answer. The answer is, you have to be brave. You have to be true to yourself. Because you yourself know what is true. How do we know this? Because if we didn't have innate knowledge of truth, if truth was completely external to us, then Jesus wouldn't resonate. His teachings wouldn't have power. But 2 billion people believe in Jesus today. Something in them recognizes his message as true, responds to it, resonates with it. That recognition, that resonance, proves that we have some kind of internal access to truth, some way of knowing what's authentic even when the world tells us otherwise. So listen to your heart. Notice what makes your spark glow. And yes, it's hard. Most of us don't manage it. We get caught up in what others expect, in what society demands, in the need to survive and succeed by conventional measures. And that's okay, because this isn't the only lifetime. In Buddhism and Hinduism, reincarnation acknowledges this reality. Maybe in this lifetime, we don't figure it out. Maybe we need 50 lifetimes, 100, 1,000. But eventually, you'll figure out that what other people say doesn't ultimately matter. That this world we live in is a false world. That you should do what you believe to be true. And when you do, when you follow your authentic path, you'll discover that it makes you more fulfilled, more alive, more connected to the divine. You can see this in people's faces. When you meet someone who's chasing money and power, there's something hollow in their eyes, something missing. But when you meet someone who's generous, who does what they love, who teaches with passion, who creates with joy, there's a light in them. Their face is different. Their presence is different. Remember Achilles, when he did evil, when he betrayed Patroclus and desecrated Hector's body. Evil came into him, corrupted his soul, left him tormented and unable to find peace. When you do good, good comes into you and brightens your soul, and you brighten the world with it. But how do we know what's right or wrong without education and socialization? The answer is the spark in you. When you love someone and that person loves you back, your spark glows. You feel it, you know it, you can't deny it. When you become a teacher and your students learn and grow, your spark glows. When you create something beautiful or useful or meaningful, your spark glows. You try different things. You experiment with life. And you notice what makes your spark glow. And you build your life around that. And here's the really important understanding, one that makes all of this less frightening, less overwhelming. Our lives are infinite. Death is like a game reset. You try, you make mistakes, you learn what you can, and then you die. You return to the source. You reflect on what happened, and then you come back and try again. It's your choice. Free will is fundamental. You get to decide what to do with your life. No one forces you. No one controls you. When you die, you go back to the astral plane, and you're able to see your life from a broader perspective. See where you succeeded, where you failed, where you grew, where you stagnated. And then you come back and start over with new opportunities, new challenges, new chances to learn and grow. Eventually you'll figure it out. It might take 1,000,000 years. It might take 1,000 lifetimes. Who knows? But you will figure it out. Because time is infinite. Because the divine is patient. Because you have infinite opportunities to learn. What's really important is that you have to figure it out yourself. No one can do it for you. Not Jesus, not Buddha, not any teacher or parent or friend. They can give you ideas. They can point in directions. But you have to discover truth yourself. Walk the path yourself. Make your own mistakes and learn your own lessons. And that's why this is so hard for people to accept. Because people don't want individual responsibility. They want someone to tell them what to do, to give them rules to follow, to make decisions for them. But freedom requires responsibility. And growth requires making mistakes. And wisdom requires learning for yourself. The Russian novelist Dostoevsky explored this problem beautifully in his novel The Brothers Karamazov. There's a section called The Grand Inquisitor that addresses the fundamental issue Jesus left unresolved. The problem is this: Jesus says there's a divine spark inside you, and it's your responsibility to let it grow, to find your own path, to discover truth yourself. This is wonderful for people who have the courage, the intelligence, the circumstances to embrace this freedom. But what about everyone else? What about the millions of people who just want to live normal lives, who don't want this burden of freedom, who would rather be told what to do? In Dostoevsky's story, Jesus returns to earth during the Spanish Inquisition. People recognize him, he's performing miracles, he's healing people, everyone is rejoicing. But the Grand Inquisitor, the leader of the Catholic Church, has Jesus arrested. And in a long monologue, the Inquisitor explains why Jesus must be killed again. He says, "You came to free people, to tell them there's a divine spark in them, that they don't have to be slaves. that they can create their own meaning, but that just confuses people. That creates anxiety and suffering. That burdens people with terrible freedom they don't want. Before, teachers would tell people what is good and what is evil. Now you say people must decide for themselves. It's complete chaos. People don't want to think for themselves. They want to be told what to do. We understand this, so we corrupted your teachings. We created mystery, miracle, and authority. We made religion about believing and obeying, not about thinking and growing. And people rejoiced that they were again led like sheep, that the terrible gift of freedom was lifted from their hearts. Were we wrong? Don't we love mankind by lightening their burden, by permitting their weak nature to avoid the terror of choice? The Inquisitor finishes his argument and waits for Jesus to respond, wants Jesus to defend himself, to explain why freedom is worth the suffering. But Jesus says nothing. He simply walks up to the old Inquisitor and softly kisses him on his bloodless, aged lips. That's all. That's his answer. The old man shudders. His lips move. He goes to the door, opens it, and says to Jesus, "Go and come no more. Come not at all. Never, never." And he lets him out into the dark alleys of the town. The prisoner goes away, and the kiss glows in the old man's heart. But the old man adheres to his idea. Do you see what happened? The Inquisitor had great arguments. His logic was sound. His understanding of human nature was accurate in many ways. And he asked Jesus, "What's your response?" And Jesus' response was, "I forgive you. I love you." Just like Priam kissing Achilles' hand, just like that act of humble, vulnerable love that broke through Achilles' rage. By kissing the Inquisitor, rather than fighting him, rather than arguing with him, rather than condemning him, Jesus wins. The Inquisitor knows he's lost, knows he's been humbled, knows that love is more powerful than all his arguments and systems of control. So he lets Jesus go. "Just leave. Please don't bother us again. This is not your world. This is Satan's world." The kiss glows in his heart, but the old man adheres to his ideas. Jesus didn't change the Inquisitor's mind, didn't convince him through argument. But there's a spark in him now that glows. The spark that he tried to kill with reason, with evil, with his system of control. It's still there, awakened by love. And that's the power of forgiveness. And that's the teaching. Even the most evil person, even someone who's built an entire system of oppression and control, still has a spark, still has the capacity to be moved by love. So the Inquisitor poses this problem. People don't want freedom. People lack courage to think for themselves. What's the solution? And the solution is the soul is eternal. We're talking about millions of years, not 50 years, not one lifetime, but countless lifetimes. Maybe not in this generation will people figure it out, but in a million years they will. And Jesus and God and the divine source are patient, loving, forgiving, generous, compassionate. Take your time. What matters is that people learn for themselves. Eventually, you'll figure out that being a slave is unfulfilling. Eventually, you'll discover that passive entertainment doesn't satisfy. Eventually, you'll realize that creating and loving and connecting brings more joy than consuming and accumulating. Eventually, because time is infinite and the divine can wait. Now let's address directly a question that's been hovering over this entire discussion. Why did Jesus have to kill himself? What's the logic of the crucifixion? Why was his death necessary? Traditionally, The Catholic Church taught what's called ransom theory. They said, when we sinned, we became slaves of Satan. So Jesus made a deal. I'll die, and you can have my body, and in exchange, you have to free my people. Satan agreed because he thought he was getting a good deal. God himself in exchange for all these slaves. But Jesus, being divine, couldn't really die permanently. So Satan got tricked. We were freed. And now we're supposed to be grateful to Jesus, supposed to worship him. But Dante, thinking about this centuries later, said, no, that can't be right. God did not come to free us so that we become slaves to God. God came to free us so that we could be free. In Dante's Divine Comedy, there's a conversation between Dante and Beatrice, his beloved guide in heaven. They discuss the nature of the universe and why Jesus had to die. Beatrice says, the greatest gift in the magnanimity of God as he created, the gift most suited to his goodness, the gift that he most prizes, was freedom of will. Freedom, that's the underlying principle of the universe. If God is love, and he loves people, then he must trust people. Therefore, freedom of will is the most important principle. Just like if you're a parent who truly loves your child, you will let your child go, let them make their own mistakes. You won't protect them from everything. Even if it means they might get hurt, might suffer, might fail, you have to let them go. Let them explore, let them learn. Because true love means trusting other people to find their own way. Dante asks, but why did God choose precisely this pathway for redemption? Why did Jesus have to die? And Beatrice responds, this ordinance is buried from the eyes of everyone whose intellect has not matured within the flame of love. In other words, stop thinking with your mind alone. Feel with your heart. Let your divine spark glow, and then you will understand. Beatrice continues explaining, the goodness that has banished every envy from itself burns in itself, and sparkling so, it shows eternal beauties. All that derives directly from this goodness is everlasting, since the seal of goodness is an imprint that never alters. God is perfect, forever good, forever loving, forever compassionate, forever forgiving. And there's a spark of God in us, the divine spark, which is our deepest nature, our truest self. So there's always this perfection in us, always this potential for goodness and love. But only man's sin annuls man's liberty and makes him unlike the highest good, so that in him the brightness of its light is dimmed. Even though the spark is forever in us, we can cover it up. We can forget about it. We can dim its light. How? By doing evil, by disobeying our true nature, by betraying ourselves and others. The more evil we do, the more we forget the spark, the more it dims in us. But it can never be destroyed. It's always there, waiting to be rediscovered. Dante continues, man in his limits could not recompense, for no obedience, no humility he offered later could have been so deep that it could match the heights he meant to reach through disobedience. Man lacked the power to offer satisfaction by himself. What does this mean? When we disobeyed God, when we tried to become like God by eating from the tree of knowledge, we committed an offense that we cannot compensate for on our own. We tried to be God. We tried, in a sense, to kill God, to take God's place. And how do you apologize for that? How do you make amends? You can't. The offense is too great, too fundamental. But Beatrice says, therefore God had to show greater generosity in giving his own self, that man might be able to rise, than if he simply pardoned. For every other means fell short of justice, except the way whereby the Son of God humbled himself when he became incarnate. So here's the problem God faces. He has to forgive us, but he has to forgive us in a way that allows us to learn, to grow, to become better. If God just forgives us without any consequence, we won't learn anything. We'll just keep making the same mistakes. But if God simply punishes us, that creates resentment, fear, a master-slave relationship rather than love. So, what can God do? Let me offer an analogy that might help illuminate this. Imagine I'm a father, and I have a daughter named Eve, and we have a dog that Eve loves. And one day, Eve asks me, "Do you love me, or do you love the dog more?" And I say, "I love you both. Love is infinite. Of course I love you, and I also love the dog." But Eve thinks, "How do I know he truly loves me? How can I tell?" So what does Eve do? She kills the dog. And then Eve comes to me and says, "Now do you love me, or did you love the dog more?" Now I'm stuck in an impossible position. If I punish her, that proves I love the dog more than I love her. It confirms her fear. But if I don't punish her, she learns that she can do terrible things without consequence. She might do it again. She hasn't learned why her action was wrong. So what can I do? The only way out of this paradox, the only way to both love her and teach her, is if I punish myself. Because I should have communicated better. I should have shown her more clearly how much I loved her. I should have made her feel so secure in my love that she never needed to test it. So what I do is take a whip and I hit myself. And Eve watches this. And now Eve knows absolutely and completely that I love her because I'm punishing myself for her sake. I'm suffering because of what happened. And she also won't do it again because she's horrified by what she's caused. She sees my suffering and realizes the weight of her action. She feels genuine remorse, genuine understanding. This is why Jesus had to die. God had to punish himself so that we would be humbled by the sacrifice, so we would feel remorse and regret for causing God to suffer. So we would understand deeply and experientially the consequences of our disobedience. And because of this, because of witnessing this divine self-sacrifice, we would never want to disobey again. We would be motivated by love, not by fear of punishment. Jesus freed us from the evil in us and led us to the path of good, because now all we have to do is remember Jesus, remember what he said, remember what he taught, remember his sacrifice, and we will forever be oriented toward the light. A difficult question arises, one that tests these teachings. Can someone who's done extreme evil be forgiven? If someone murders your child, can they be forgiven? And the answer, difficult as it is yes. Because the only way for this world to work, the only way for justice and peace to be possible, is if forgiveness is available. If people cannot be forgiven, then the entire universe breaks down. If you kill my daughter and forgiveness is impossible, then I have to kill yours. And then you have to kill my family. And I have to kill yours. And it becomes an endless cycle of violence and hatred and revenge. Blood feuds that last generations. Wars that continue for centuries. Suffering multiplying endlessly. The only way for this world to work, the only way for society to function, the only way for peace to be possible, is if we're allowed to forgive each other. And this is why God is a God of forgiveness. Because without forgiveness, creation itself would collapse into eternal vengeance. Now, this doesn't mean the person who killed your daughter doesn't go to prison. Justice is still served in the worldly sense. Consequences still follow actions. But spiritually, forgiveness must be possible for their sake and for yours. Because if you can't forgive, you remain trapped in hatred, you remain bound to the person who hurt you. Your entire life becomes organized around that wound, that rage, that desire for revenge. And the person who committed the evil, if they can never be forgiven, if there's no path to redemption, then what incentive do they have to grow, to change, to become better? They might as well continue doing evil, since their fate is already sealed. But if forgiveness is possible, if even the worst actions can be understood, learned from, atoned for over time and through many lifetimes, then there's always hope, always a path forward, always the possibility of transformation. This is what Jesus meant when he said we must forgive 70 times 7, meaning infinitely, meaning always. Not because evil actions don't matter, but because forgiveness is the only thing that breaks the cycle, the only thing that allows both victim and perpetrator to move forward, the only thing that brings healing. Dante asks another profound question. If God is perfect and everything he creates is perfect, then why do we die? Why is there corruption and decay? And the answer reveals the deeper purpose of existence. God is perfect. He creates perfection, but he creates the laws of the universe, the structure of reality, the game itself, and that's what's perfect. But the things within the game, the beings living within this reality, we enter a cycle of life and death, growth and decay, because that's the only way for the game to work properly, for us to actually learn and grow. The laws are created and perfect, but your individual life is breathed forth by the divine, who loves you so much that it desires you always. And from this, we can deduce resurrection. Not just Jesus' resurrection, but yours, mine, everyone's, because we are eternal. The spark is eternal. Only the body dies, returns to dust. But the consciousness, the soul, the divine spark, it returns to the source and will be reborn. This world is designed specifically for learning, for making mistakes and growing from them, for experimenting with freedom, with choice, with creation. We don't have to worry about making mistakes, because when we die, we return to the source, we integrate what we learned, and we come back with new opportunities. Jesus was resurrected, and we will be resurrected as well, again and again. Infinite opportunities to grow as souls. That's the purpose of life. To learn, to make mistakes, to be creative, to imagine new possibilities, to discover who we truly are, and to ensure that we can continue to grow. There's death. Death allows for a reset, for rejuvenation, for learning from mistakes without being permanently trapped in their consequences. So don't think about just this lifetime. Think about all possible lifetimes. All the cycles of growth and learning stretching into infinity, and live your life accordingly. Make the most of this experience. Make as many mistakes as you need to, because only by making mistakes, by trying and failing and trying again, can you actually grow as a soul. Now let's look at what the Bible itself preserves of Jesus' actual teachings, because there are passages that confirm what we've been discussing, even though the church tries to obscure their radical implications. There's a famous section called the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus stands on a hillside and preaches to a crowd. And he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This is his message. What matters is not worldly success, not power or wealth or status. What matters is the condition of your heart, the purity of your spirit, your connection to the divine. In fact, it's probably those who are slaves, those who are poor, those who suffer in worldly terms. They're more likely to be virtuous, more likely to maintain their connection to the divine, because they haven't been corrupted by power and wealth. And they will inherit the kingdom, not despite their poverty and suffering, but in some sense because of it. Because their circumstances didn't allow them to become drunk on worldly success. Jesus continues, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Be the light. Every one of you has a light inside you. Every one of you has power to change the universe, to do good in this world. Don't hide it. Don't diminish it. Let it shine." And then comes perhaps the most radical teaching, the one that turns conventional morality completely upside down. "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Love your enemies." Think about what this means in the context of Roman occupation. Love the Romans who oppress you. Love the soldiers who enforce brutal laws. Love the tax collectors who extract your wealth. Love the empire that treats you as less than human. This isn't passive acceptance of evil. This isn't saying oppression is fine. This is saying we are in this world to do as much good as possible, and evil people give us the opportunity to do good. If there's no evil in the world, how could goodness manifest? How could love be tested? How could forgiveness be practiced? The existence of evil is the challenge, the test, the purpose. It's what allows us to demonstrate and develop our divine nature. So thank evil people. Not because what they do is right, but because they provide the context in which goodness can shine. This is the ultimate teaching, the hardest one to accept, but the key to everything. We cannot control what others do. We can only control our own response, our own inner state, our own connection to the divine. And by maintaining love even for enemies, by refusing to let their evil corrupt our own hearts, by continuing to shine our light even in darkness, we fulfill our purpose. We become children of God in the truest sense. Jesus continues in the Sermon on the Mount. "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." This is practical wisdom. Focus on your own spiritual development, on making your heart pure and good and loving. Don't worry about accumulating money and possessions and material success, because when you die, you can't take any of it with you. But your heart, your character, your spiritual development that follows you wherever you go, through death and rebirth, through all lifetimes, through eternity. And then the crucial line: no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. This is the fundamental choice, the ultimate decision each person must make. What is Satan? Satan is money, power, the material world, worldly success. This world belongs to Satan. This world is ruled by principles of competition and accumulation and domination. There's nothing you can do about that. That's how the material realm functions. But when you leave this world, when you die and return to the source, that's the world of God. That's where divine principles of love and connection and unity prevail. So it's your choice. You can be like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or any billionaire. You can have immense wealth in this world, appear incredibly successful by worldly standards. But what happens after death? What's the condition of the soul? What treasures have been stored in heaven? These are the questions that actually matter. The only questions with eternal significance. And finally, perhaps the most important teaching in all of Jesus' words, one that completely contradicts what Christianity later became. Jesus says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.'" Read that again carefully. Let it sink in. The Christian religion tells us that all that matters is believing in Jesus. That if you accept him as your Lord and Savior, you'll be saved regardless of your actions. But Jesus himself is saying, no, don't use my name. Don't claim to follow me. Don't perform miracles in my name. What matters is doing good, being good, following the will of God, which means following your divine spark, doing what's right, loving others, forgiving, growing spiritually. In fact, Jesus is saying that people who use his name, who claim to prophesy in his name, who perform works in his name, these are the evildoers. These are the ones he doesn't know, will reject. Because using Jesus' name to control others, to claim authority, to build religious institutions, this is exactly what Jesus opposed. This is the opposite of his teaching. The church says, worship Jesus and you'll be saved. Jesus says, don't worship me. Do good, be good, find your own light. This is the fundamental contradiction, the gap between what Jesus taught and what Christianity became. And understanding this gap, understanding how Jesus' message was transformed, corrupted, co-opted, that's essential to understanding both history and spirituality. So how did we get from Jesus' actual teachings to the Catholic Church that says you must obey us or be condemned to hell? How did that transformation happen? The answer is the Catholic Church was created by the Roman Empire, not by Jesus. This is the crucial insight that changes everything. After Jesus was killed, his brother James led the original movement in Jerusalem. These were the Ebionites, the poor. They followed Jesus' actual teachings. They believed Jesus was a prophet, not God. They believed in doing good works, not just believing. They continued to follow Jewish law, but with Jesus' emphasis on inner transformation rather than empty ritual. This was authentic Christianity. The version that came directly from people who knew Jesus, who heard him teach, who understood his message. But then the Roman Empire realized something. They realized that Jesus' message was spreading, that people were finding hope in his teachings, that they couldn't stop it by killing more people, because that just created more martyrs. So the Romans did something brilliant and evil. They co-opted the movement. They took control of it. They changed the message. They transformed Jesus from a rebel teacher into a symbol of obedience. How did they do this? Through a man named Paul. Paul never met Jesus. Paul was a Roman citizen who had persecuted Christians, but then he claimed to have a vision, a conversion experience on the road to Damascus. And Paul started preaching a very different version of Christianity. Paul's version said, forget about good works. Forget about following the law. All that matters is believing that Jesus is God and that he died for your sins. Paul took Jesus' message of inner transformation and turned it into a religion of belief and obedience. And the Roman Empire loved Paul's version because it was useful to the empire. Paul told slaves to obey their masters, told people to pay their taxes, told people to submit to authority, because all authority comes from God. This is the opposite of what Jesus taught. Jesus taught that Roman authority is meaningless, that this world is a corpse, that spiritual freedom matters more than political obedience. But Paul's Christianity supported the empire, made people docile, obedient, accepting of their oppression. And Paul had connections at the highest levels of Roman authority. Every time he got in trouble, Romans protected him. He could summon Jewish leaders. He could appeal directly to Caesar. This tells us he wasn't just a religious teacher. He was working with the empire, whether consciously or unconsciously, to create a version of Christianity that served Roman interests. By the 4th century CE, the Emperor Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. The same empire that had killed Jesus now claimed to worship him. And at the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, the empire decided which texts would be included in the Bible and which would be destroyed. The Gospel of Thomas was buried, hidden, lost for over 1,600 years. The Ebionite texts, the writings of James and the original followers, were destroyed. Any teaching that suggested Jesus was just a human prophet, any teaching that emphasized individual spiritual growth over institutional obedience, any teaching that challenged the empire's version, eliminated. And the story about Jewish priests killing Jesus was emphasized and exaggerated. Why? To shift blame away from Rome and onto the Jews. Because if people believed the Romans killed Jesus, they might resist Roman authority. But if they believed the Jews killed Jesus, then the Romans were innocent and the Jews became the eternal scapegoat, the convenient target for Christian hatred and violence. This is how the Catholic Church was born. Not from Jesus, but from the Roman Empire, using Jesus' name to maintain control. The same empire that crucified Jesus for teaching spiritual freedom now claimed to represent him and used his name to justify oppression, to demand obedience, to build hierarchies of power. Everything Jesus opposed. Religious authorities claiming special access to God, rules and rituals replacing inner transformation, fear and control replacing love and freedom. All of this became Christianity. For 2,000 years, this false version has dominated billions of people worshiping Jesus without understanding what he actually taught, believing they need to worship Jesus to be saved, when Jesus himself said, "Don't worship me, follow your own heart. And for 2,000 years, the church has used Jesus' name to justify conquest, colonization, inquisitions, crusades, witch burnings, persecution of Jews, suppression of women, opposition to science, control of thought, all in the name of the man who taught love your enemies, forgive infinitely, find a divine spark within yourself. It's one of the great tragedies of human history, how a message of liberation became a tool of oppression, how a teacher who challenged empire became the mascot of empire, how the light became darkness. But the truth survived, hidden in buried texts, in the insights of great thinkers, in the hearts of people who recognized authentic wisdom when they encountered it. And now you know. Now you can see through the illusion. Now you understand what Jesus actually taught versus what the empire made of his teaching. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? We've covered a long journey from the historical facts about Jesus to the Gospel of Thomas to Dante and Dostoevsky, from the Sermon on the Mount to the creation of the Catholic Church. And perhaps your mind is tired. Perhaps some of this has drifted past you while you rested, and that's perfectly fine. What matters absorbed will stay. What didn't resonate will fade. And both are as they should be. But let's gather together some of the key insights, not to memorize, not to cling to, but just to see the pattern, the whole picture. Jesus was a Jewish teacher in first century Palestine, living under Roman occupation, teaching during a time of immense suffering and spiritual crisis. His message was that the material world, where empires seem to triumph, is false, temporary, ultimately meaningless. What's real is the spiritual realm, the divine spark within each person. He taught that even the most powerful oppressors are spiritually dead, tormented by demons of their own making, and that truly free people are those who maintain their inner light regardless of external circumstances. He taught that each person has a divine spark, a connection to the ultimate source, and that the path to fulfillment is finding that spark, letting it glow, following where it leads. He taught that love and forgiveness are more powerful than violence and revenge, that the only way to break cycles of evil is through compassion, even for enemies. He taught that religious authorities who claim to mediate between people and God are frauds, that you don't need priests or rituals or institutions. You need to look within, to know yourself, to discover your own divine nature. These teachings were dangerous to Rome because they told people that imperial power is meaningless, that you can be spiritually free even as a slave, that you don't have to value what the empire tells you to value. So the Romans killed him, crucified him as a rebel, as a threat to their system of control. But his message didn't die. It spread. And the empire, unable to suppress it through violence, co-opted it instead, changed it, corrupted it, turned it into a religion of obedience rather than liberation. The real message, the one Jesus actually taught, is this: you have a divine spark. You are more than your body, more than your circumstances, more than what society says you are. This material world is false. It's not ultimate reality. It's a temporary game, a learning environment, a corpse animated only by your consciousness. Grow your spark through love, forgiveness, compassion, creativity, authenticity, through doing what makes your light shine, what brings joy to yourself and others. Don't worship anyone, not Jesus, not any teacher or prophet. Instead, find your own light and let it shine. Don't fear death. Death is just a reset, a return to the source, an opportunity to integrate learning and begin again. Don't hate your enemies. They're more trapped than you are, more tormented, more in need of love. Forgiving them frees both them and you. Don't chase worldly success. Money and power and status are meaningless in the only realm that truly matters. Store treasures in heaven by developing your soul, your character, your capacity for love. This message was so powerful, so transformative, so dangerous that the empire had to bury it, had to replace it with a safe, controllable version that said, believe in Jesus, obey the church, don't question, don't think for yourself. But the truth survived. In hidden texts, in the insights of mystics and poets, in the hearts of people who could feel that something was wrong with official Christianity, that the real message must be something deeper. And now you have access to that truth. You've seen what Jesus actually taught. You understand why the empire killed him and how they co-opted his message. The divine spark is in you, waiting to be recognized, waiting to glow, waiting to transform your life. So what will you do with this knowledge? Will you continue to follow the empire's version of Christianity? The version that tells you to believe and obey, that threatens you with hell if you question, that makes Jesus into a distant God to be worshipped rather than a teacher showing you your own divine nature? Or will you follow Jesus' actual teaching? The teaching that tells you to think and grow and love, that encourages you to find your own light and shine it into the world, that sees you as equal to Jesus, as having the same divine spark, the same potential. The choice is yours. It's always been yours. That's what Jesus came to tell us. We are free. Free to grow, free to learn, free to make mistakes, free to discover truth for ourselves. The spark is in us. And no empire, no matter how powerful, no institution, no matter how ancient, can ever take that away. But freedom requires courage, requires taking responsibility for your own spiritual growth, requires being willing to question what you've been taught, to think for yourself, to trust your own inner knowing. Most people don't want this. They want someone to tell them what to believe, to give them rules to follow, to make decisions for them. And that's okay. That's their choice. Maybe in this lifetime, they need that structure, that security. Maybe in future lifetimes, they'll be ready for more freedom. But if something in you resonates with Jesus's real teaching, if something in you recognizes truth when you hear it, if something in you yearns to find your own light rather than borrowing someone else's, then you have a path forward. Not an easy path, not a comfortable path, but a path toward genuine freedom and fulfillment. How do you actually live this teaching? What does it mean in practical terms? First, you question everything. Everything you've been told by authorities, by society, by religious institutions. You ask, is this true? Does this resonate with my inner knowing? Or am I just accepting it because I'm supposed to? Second, you pay attention to your spark. You notice what makes you feel alive, connected, purposeful, joyful, and you organize your life around that rather than around what others expect or what society values. Third, you practice forgiveness, not just of others, but of yourself. You recognize that mistakes are part of learning, that failures are opportunities for growth, that you have infinite lifetimes to figure things out. Fourth, you love your enemies. You see through their apparent power to their spiritual poverty. You recognize that they're trapped in their own demons, suffering in ways you might not be, and you respond with compassion rather than hatred. Fifth, you create rather than consume. You make things, help people, contribute to the world. You let your light shine through action, through service, through bringing something new into existence. 6, you accept that this is hard. That most of the time you'll fail, you'll fall back into old patterns, you'll forget what you know. And that's okay. That's part of the process. What matters is you keep trying, keep returning to the practice, keep remembering the teaching. 7th, you recognize that you're eternal, that this one lifetime is just one chapter in an infinite story, that there's no rush, no deadline, no final judgment, just endless opportunities to learn and grow and remember who you truly are. And finally, you trust. Trust that the divine spark in you knows the way. Trust that when you're confused, the answer will come. Trust that when you fall, you'll be able to rise. Trust that you are loved always, unconditionally, by the source from which you came and to which you'll return. And so we come toward the end of this long exploration, this journey through the life and teachings of Jesus, through the corruption of his message, through the recovery of truth. If you're still listening consciously, notice how you feel. What has shifted? What questions have arisen? If you drifted into sleep along the way, that's beautiful. Your unconscious absorbed what it needed, integrated what resonated, released what didn't serve. Jesus was not God. Jesus was a human being with a divine spark, just like you. But Jesus figured out how to make that spark glow so brightly that 2,000 years later, we're still talking about him, still sensing the power of his teaching, still feeling the truth of his message. Jesus did not die for your sins in the sense that Christian theology teaches. He died because he was a threat to the Roman Empire, because he taught people that imperial power is meaningless and inner freedom is everything. Jesus did not found Christianity. The Roman Empire founded Christianity using Jesus' name to create a religion of obedience and control, burying his real teachings, persecuting anyone who remembered what he actually said. Jesus' actual message was simple and profound. You have a divine spark. This material world is false. The true reality is spiritual and eternal. Grow your spark through love, forgiveness, compassion, creativity. Don't worship anyone. Find your own light and shine it. That message was so powerful, so dangerous, so transformative that the empire had to bury it, had to replace it with something safe and controllable. But truth cannot be destroyed. It survives in hidden places, in forgotten texts, in the hearts of people who recognize wisdom when they encounter it. And now you know. Now you've seen what Jesus actually taught. Now you understand the gap between the historical figure and the religious icon. The question is not whether you believe this. Belief is what the empire wants. Belief without understanding, faith without questioning. The question is whether you recognize truth, whether something in you responds to this teaching, whether your own divine spark glows a little brighter hearing these words. Remember that the soul is eternal. Remember that we're talking about millions of years, countless lifetimes, infinite opportunities to learn and grow. The divine is patient, infinitely patient, because the divine exists outside of time. Because the divine knows that eventually, inevitably, we will all remember who we are. We'll all return fully to the source. So there's no rush, no pressure, no judgment if you don't figure it out in this lifetime. Maybe you need 1,000 more lifetimes to learn what Jesus learned. Maybe you need to make every possible mistake before you're ready to see truth. Maybe you need to chase worldly success until you finally realize it's empty. That's okay. That's part of the journey. That's what this material world is for experimenting, for trying different paths, for learning through experience rather than being told what's true. And the beauty of infinite time is that nothing is wasted. Every mistake teaches something. Every suffering develops compassion. Every failure builds wisdom. Every lifetime contributes to the soul's growth. So be gentle with yourself. Forgive yourself. Give yourself permission to not have it all figured out. You're eternal. You have all the time in the universe, and the divine loves you no matter where you are in your journey. What matters is not perfection, but direction. Not achieving enlightenment, but moving toward it. Not being Jesus, but recognizing that you have the same divine nature as Jesus, the same potential, the same ultimate destination. Ideas return. Truth resurfaces. Wisdom rediscovered across generations. Plato taught about the realm of forms, the divine source from which all reality emanates. Zoroaster taught about the cosmic battle between truth and falsehood, between connection and separation. Buddha taught about the illusory nature of the material world and the path to liberation from suffering. And Jesus taught these same eternal truths, translated for his time and place, expressed through his unique voice and experience. Then Dante rediscovered these teachings centuries later, understanding through his own spiritual journey what Jesus had really meant. Then Dostoevsky explored them again, grappling with the problem of freedom and responsibility that Jesus' teaching creates. Then the Gospel of Thomas was found in 1945, buried for 16 centuries, returning to remind us what we'd forgotten. Truth circles back, not because anyone is copying, but because truth is truth. It exists independently, eternally, waiting to be rediscovered by each generation, by each individual who looks deeply enough. And so, these teachings reach you now, across 2 millennia, through layers of corruption and distortion, but still recognizable, still resonant, still true, and they will continue. Others will rediscover them, reinterpret them for their time, express them in new ways, because the divine spark is indestructible, and the human yearning for truth is eternal. And eventually, one way or another, wisdom finds those who are ready to receive it. Sometimes it's worth imagining, what would the world look like if Jesus' actual teachings had been preserved? If the Ebionites had prevailed? If Paul's version had been rejected? If the Roman Empire hadn't co-opted Christianity? We might have a religion that emphasized inner transformation over belief, that encouraged questioning and spiritual experimentation rather than demanding obedience, that saw every person as having equal divine potential rather than needing priestly intermediaries, that taught love and forgiveness without the threat of hell, without the fear and control, that celebrated human freedom and creativity as expressions of the divine spark. We might have had 2,000 years of Christianity that actually followed Christ, that actually practiced what Jesus taught. Instead of crusades and inquisitions, we might have had movements of radical compassion. Instead of witch burnings and persecution, we might have had celebration of diversity and spiritual seeking. Instead of supporting slavery and oppression, we might have had movements for liberation and justice. Instead of accumulating wealth and power, churches might have actually served the poor. It's painful to imagine what could have been. How much suffering might have been prevented. How much beauty and truth might have flourished. But perhaps it had to be this way. Perhaps humanity needed to learn these lessons through hard experience. Perhaps the corruption of Jesus' message was itself part of the teaching. showing us what happens when truth is co-opted by power. And perhaps now, finally, enough people are ready to hear what Jesus actually said, to see through the empire's distortions, to reclaim the authentic teaching. As we move toward closure of this long night's journey, let's return to the beginning, to the simple, profound truth at the heart of everything. There's a divine spark in you, not in some distant metaphorical sense, but actually, literally, right now. There is something in you that is eternal, indestructible, connected to the ultimate source of all reality. It's not separate from you. It is you, your truest self, your deepest nature, everything else. Your body, your personality, your memories, your circumstances, these are temporary, changeable, ultimately illusory. But the spark, the consciousness that witnesses all of this, the awareness reading these words right now, that is eternal. And this spark can grow, can shine more brightly, can illuminate not just your own life, but the lives of everyone around you. How does it grow? Through love, through forgiveness, through creativity, through authenticity, through serving others, through questioning, through learning, through making mistakes and growing from them. Every time you do something that makes you feel truly alive, that connects you to something larger than yourself, that brings joy or meaning or beauty into the world, your spark glows brighter. Every time you forgive instead of seeking revenge, every time you love instead of hating, every time you create instead of destroying, every time you give instead of taking, your spark grows. And as it grows, you become more of who you truly are, less trapped in fear and illusion, more free, more joyful, more connected. Once you recognize this, once you truly understand it, not just intellectually, but experientially, then you become immortal in a meaningful sense. Because you no longer fear death. You no longer identify solely with your temporary physical existence. But if you don't recognize it, if you remain trapped in the illusion that you are only your body, only this material form, then you fear death. And that fear keeps you imprisoned, keeps you controllable, keeps you from accessing your true nature. The next saying in the Gospel of Thomas, let him who seeks continue seeking until he finds. When he finds, he will become troubled. When he becomes troubled, he will be astonished, and he will rule over all. This is Plato's allegory of the cave. The same pattern, the same journey. Remember the prisoner who escapes the cave and sees the real world with sunlight? At first, it's painful, confusing. The light blinds him. His eyes hurt. He can barely see. He's troubled, disoriented. Everything he thought he knew is revealed as shadow and illusion. But if he persists, if he doesn't run back to the comfortable darkness of the cave, eventually he adjusts. He sees clearly. He understands reality as it truly is. And then he's astonished, amazed by the beauty and truth and vastness of what he now perceives. And this knowledge, this vision, gives him power, not power over others in the worldly sense, but power over himself, freedom from illusion, from fear, from the chains that bound him. The spiritual path is painful. It involves confusion and struggle. It means giving up comfortable beliefs, facing uncomfortable truths. But if you persist, you will see reality as it truly is, and that vision transforms everything. And as it grows, you become more of who you truly are, less trapped in fear and illusion, more free, more joyful, more connected. This is what Jesus discovered. This is what he was trying to show everyone. Not that he was special and you should worship him, but that he had found his spark and you could find yours too. Not by following him, but by following your own inner light, by trusting your own divine nature, by having the courage to be authentically yourself. This is the teaching. This is the truth. This is what 2,000 years of institutional Christianity tried to bury but could never completely destroy. Because truth is indestructible. Because the divine spark cannot be extinguished. Because no matter how many lies are told, wisdom eventually resurfaces. And so our long journey comes to a close. Through history and theology, through buried texts and recovered wisdom, through the gap between what Jesus taught and what Christianity became, your eyes may be heavy now. Your mind may have drifted in and out. And that is exactly as it should be. You absorbed what you needed, released what didn't serve, allowed the wisdom to settle where it belongs. We began with a question. Why do 2 billion people worship Jesus? What made him so special? What was his actual message? And we discovered that the Jesus worshipped by billions may not be the Jesus who actually lived, that his radical teaching of inner freedom was transformed into a religion of external obedience, that the spark he wanted everyone to find in themselves was redirected toward worshiping him instead. But we also discovered that his real teaching survived, hidden but not destroyed, waiting in buried scrolls and in the insights of great thinkers, waiting in the hearts of people who sensed that official Christianity was missing something essential. The divine spark is in you. This world is temporary and false. The spiritual realm is eternal and real. Love and forgiveness are more powerful than hatred and revenge. Find your own light, not by following others, but by looking within. This is what Jesus actually taught, and it's available to you now if you choose to receive it. Not as a belief system, not as something to memorize or defend, but as a living practice, a way of being, a path toward genuine freedom and fulfillment. There's no obligation here, no requirement, no judgment if this doesn't resonate or if you're not ready. The divine is patient. You have infinite lifetimes. You'll arrive when you arrive. But if something in you recognized truth in these teachings, if something in you felt your own spark glow a little brighter, if something in you yearned for the freedom and authenticity that Jesus was pointing toward, then you have a path. Not an easy path, but a real one. Not a comfortable path, but an honest one. Not a path someone else can walk for you, but one that's uniquely yours. You don't need to worship Jesus. You don't need to join a church. You don't need anyone's permission or blessing. You just need to look within, to find that spark, to let it guide you, to trust it even when the world tells you otherwise. As you prepare to sleep, or as you return to waking consciousness, or as you simply rest in this liminal space between states, know that the journey continues, that this exploration doesn't end when these words end, that truth works on you in ways you may not immediately recognize. In dreams, in quiet moments, in sudden insights that arrive unexpectedly, the teachings may resurface. Not as memories, but as lived understanding, as something you've always known but had temporarily forgotten. Jesus walked the earth 2,000 years ago, lived for perhaps 30 years, taught for maybe 3, and was killed by an empire that feared his message. But the message didn't die. It couldn't die, because truth is eternal, because the divine spark cannot be extinguished, because wisdom finds a way to survive even when institutions try to bury it. And now that message reaches you across all that time, through all those distortions, still recognizable, still resonant, still true. You have a divine spark. You are eternal. This world is temporary. Love is more powerful than hatred. Forgiveness breaks cycles of evil. Freedom means responsibility, and you have infinite time to figure it all out. These aren't just beautiful ideas. These are descriptions of reality, of how the universe actually works, of who you actually are, beneath all the layers of conditioning and belief and fear. And whether you accept this now or need lifetimes to discover it, whether this sparks immediate transformation or just plants a seed that will grow slowly over time, whether you remember these words tomorrow or forget them completely, the truth remains waiting for you, patient, eternal, inevitable, because you are the divine spark. And eventually, in ways you cannot predict or control, you will remember this. You will know it, not as something learned, but as something recognized, as coming home to yourself. Jesus showed the way, not by telling you to follow him, but by demonstrating what's possible when a human being fully realizes their divine nature. And his invitation stands, not to worship him, but to find your own light, not to believe in him, but to trust yourself, not to be saved by him, but to discover you were never actually lost. The kingdom of heaven is within you, has always been within you, will always be within you, waiting for you to notice, waiting for you to enter, waiting for you to claim what was always yours. And now, as this long exploration draws to a close, there's nothing more you need to do. No task to complete, no question to answer, no decision to make right now. Simply rest, breathe, allow yourself to be exactly where you are. The divine spark in you knows what it needs, knows what to keep and what to release, knows how to integrate wisdom without your conscious effort. 2 billion people worship Jesus, but perhaps what they're really worshiping without knowing it is the divine spark, the possibility of transformation, the promise that ordinary human beings can access extraordinary truth. And that possibility exists in you right now, always. Sleep if you need to sleep. Wake if you're ready to wake. Drift if you want to drift. The teachings will be there, whether you hold on to them or release them, whether you act on them tomorrow or need years to process them, whether they transform your life immediately or work slowly beneath the surface. What Jesus taught was never about belief. It was about recognition, about seeing what's already there, about remembering what you already know but have temporarily forgotten. And so we end where we began, with a question that becomes an invitation. Not, why do 2 billion people worship Jesus? But what is the divine spark within you? And what would happen if you let it shine? May you rest well. May you dream deeply. May your spark grow brighter with each passing day. And may you wake tomorrow with a little more freedom, a little more love, a little more connection to your own divine nature. The light that Jesus showed us is the light that lives in you. And that light, that eternal, indestructible, beautiful light, can never die. Good night, sweet rest. And when you wake, may you remember, you are not just a body walking through a temporary world. You are a divine spark. You are eternal. You are loved, and you are free. The journey continues, always continues, and you are exactly where you need to be. Rest now, and let the light within you glow.